Welcome back to Find Your Way to Vibe podcast. I'm Amber, and I'm so grateful you're here with me today. This episode is an invitation to slow down and to begin choosing yourself. There comes a moment, usually after a lot of quiet healing, when you realize you've spent years shrinking just to keep the peace, to fit in, or to make other people more comfortable. And then one day, you wake up and you think, you know what? I'm done. I'm done disappearing. Today's episode is about that moment and how choosing myself changed everything. So settle in and let's begin. Before we begin, take a deep breath with me. Take a slow breath in. And let it out gently. Wherever you are, allow yourself to arrive, to soften your shoulders, to set down whatever feels heavy, and to walk gently into this space with me. Welcome to Find Your Way to Vibe. Welcome back, everyone. In the last reflection, we spent time letting go, cutting the cord with patterns and expectations and roles that were shaped by survival, setting down what no longer served us. But after we let something go, there's often a quiet pause, a space where nothing is being held anymore. And in that space, a question begins to form. Who am I choosing now? For many years, I learned how to make myself smaller, to adapt, to accommodate, and to keep moving, keep giving, keep going, even when my own needs weren't being met and were whispering for attention. Choosing myself now doesn't feel loud or dramatic. It feels honest, and it feels a lot slower. It feels like listening inward and trusting myself. And today, we're going to sit with that choice, not perfectly, not all at once, but gently, as a practice of returning to yourself. Before we move any further into today's reflection, I want to pause here for a moment and share how this practice showed up for me this week. Because choosing yourself isn't always quiet or graceful. Sometimes it's messy, and sometimes it stirs things up before they settle. And that was very much my experience this week. Finding my way to vibe wasn't gentle at first, but it was honest and a little intense. After last week's reflection, I found myself very much in my head about it all, and I let it just sit with me a little too long. I could feel things stirring that I had clearly been holding on to for a while, and eventually I was able to release some of that suppressed energy, but it wasn't pretty. I was agitated this week with a few things that I have been carrying, and I was finally able to speak up about it. And it felt really good because it was driving me crazy. So I knew that I needed to let it out and let it go. But it wasn't as gracious as I usually try to be. But it felt really good to finally say it and put words to what I was actually feeling, because that's something that I haven't been able to do for a while. So to be able to put those words to the feelings was a good start. And while I let those emotions linger a little bit too long, it was imperative that I addressed it, especially between the weight of work, the mental density of the week, and everything I was processing internally. I could feel myself getting overwhelmed. So I did what I often do, and I went on one of my walks. I thought for sure that within the first 10 minutes I'd calm down, because that's usually what happens. Is I start quick, my nervous system kind of regulates, and then I just go at a easier pace. But that is not what happened this week. I instead kept the pace with my emotions the entire time. And let me tell you, they were on fire. But I stayed with it, and I allowed myself to feel it. And even though it took longer than usual, the walk helped. And by bedtime, I could feel my body start to soften and my breath start to slow. My nervous system finally settled just enough for me to relax a little bit more. Now, I want to turn it over to you. How did you find your way to vibe this week? You can share it with me on the contact page at findyourwaytovibe.com, or head over to Instagram and send me a message or tag me in a post. I truly look forward to hearing your stories. As we step onto today's Trail of Gratitude, I invite you to gently pause and notice what's present for you right now. Wherever you are, whether you're walking, driving, sitting, or lying down listening, take a few breaths and let that awareness settle. If you feel moved to, you might make note of what's coming up, or simply allow it to pass through you. You might notice something softening. You might feel a sense of lightness. You might simply feel more present, more connected to what matters in this moment. As I sat with this practice today, what came forward for me was gratitude for the people in my life who truly see me. Their support this week meant more than they probably realized, but they noticed a shift in me and held space without needing to fix anything. They made me laugh. They reminded me of the love that surrounds me. I'm deeply grateful for the support I have at home and for the friends and coworkers who show up with presence and care. I feel incredibly blessed to be held in that kind of love, especially during moments of growth and change. As you hold your own gratitude today, there's no need to shape it or explain it. Just notice what's there and let it be enough. And as we carry that gratitude with us, let it walk beside you as we move gently into today's reflection. Today's reflection is about choosing myself after years of shrinking. Most people don't wake up one day and decide to shrink. It happens slowly and quietly, almost without noticing. You shrink when your needs are being ignored, often enough that you stop naming them. When expressing yourself leads to conflict, so staying quiet feels safer. When someone makes you feel like you're too much, and being smaller feels easier than being seen. When your worth starts to feel tied to how helpful, agreeable, or easy you can be. And the hardest part is this: you don't even realize it's happening. It becomes your default. Stay quiet, stay agreeable, stay easy, stay low maintenance. For a long time, that was my way of moving through the world. I told myself it was fine, that I didn't want to make a big deal out of things, that I could handle it, that it wasn't worth the argument, that other people needed me more than I needed anything. I thought I was managing, but the truth is, I wasn't. I was slowly disappearing, and choosing myself didn't begin with a bold declaration or a dramatic moment. It began with noticing. with recognizing where I had learned to shrink and gently asking what it might look like to choose myself instead. When I really started to sit with this question of how I learned to shrink myself, it didn't take long before I was taken back to my childhood. I grew up in the era of be seen but not heard. I feel many of you can relate. The most impactful moments that popped up were the moments when I was laughing while I was either playing or laughing with friends, completely in moments of joy. And then we would be told to stop, to quiet down because we were being too loud or too much for the other people, which oftentimes were in another room. Those moments were pretty powerful. Those little moments that didn't seem big at the time, but they planted something quietly. And it taught me when it was okay to take up space and when it's not. I genuinely love to laugh. And over the years, because of those moments, I've noticed that when my laughter fades, it's usually a sign of something that isn't aligning for me, that there's just an unsettling feeling in my body and letting me know that I've drifted away from myself in some way. And it served as a signal of something that was causing me to shrink. As I got older, I became more aware of judgment and how deeply it shaped the way I moved through the world. One moment that really stuck with me was in seventh grade. I ran for student council, and I would remember feeling very hopeful and excited and ready to contribute, only to realize it wasn't about ideas or leadership at all. It was about popularity. I was not popular, so I was not getting the votes. And once that sank in, I felt a little out of place and embarrassed for even trying. I had let that moment hold power over me, and it had power over me for a long time, actually. Public speaking became one of my biggest fears. And before that, I was okay with getting up in front of people and in front of my peers. But after that moment, I stopped and I was so afraid to get up on stage and talk in front of people. It was even hard to get up in front of the class just to present something. And it still is a little hard sometimes, but I'm working on it. And it starts here, right? Progress, not perfection. So here we are working on the fear of public speaking in a big way, I guess. Then came high school, and with it, the constant hum of other people's opinions that became much louder. Not many people are aware of this, but I graduated early because I was being bullied and harassed over rumors and who I was dating. On top of that, I was in a very threatening situation, and it was exhausting and painful and isolating. So I did what I knew how to do at the time. I shrank. I hid away and I left early. I let other people's chaos determine my silence and my direction in life. Later in marriage, shrinking became survival. I kept myself small to keep the peace. I minimized my needs while managing everything around me. I stayed busy handling life. I kept my head down and I put myself last. After my divorce, something shifted. And for a while, I did really well. I was really excited for life again. I pushed myself back into the world. I was laughing again. I joined different things like ballroom and hiking groups to force myself to reconnect with life and with people as I navigated school and raising children on my own. And then I entered a chapter of my life where I shrank to a point where I barely even recognized myself. That season was intense, energetic in all the wrong ways, overstimulating, dark, and just taxing. The person I was with would find ways to demean me and make me feel like I was unimportant. The energy around me felt so much bigger than I could hold. And day by day, I just got smaller. It took years to reconcile that chapter, but I'm glad I finally have. Part of that season involved my endurance racing years, and I could tell you a dozen stories, but there are a few moments that stand out amongst the rest that have impacted the way that I felt and the way that I shrank myself. I did various obstacle events for a long time, and then I moved into the endurance races that lasted 24 to 30 hours or more. They are the ones that pushed me physically and mentally past my perceived limits. And I felt like I had no business doing them, but somehow I kept showing up. In one of my first endurance races, I actually surprised myself. I was keeping up and I would do really well during the mental challenges. I was really good at the mental challenges and I somehow made it through the physical ones. I pushed really hard, but I made it. We covered long distances and did things that I probably had no business doing. We chopped logs. We did very physical things, and I didn't think I was capable of doing them, but somehow I did. And I was proud of myself for that because I really didn't train like everybody else trained, but I was still keeping up and I was holding my own. Toward the end of that race, we had to run down into town to some running store and then run back to the camp. And on the way back to the camp, I was feeling really strong because I had been encouraged on the way down by another racer who helped me just kind of reset my mindset. And as we headed back, people began talking about finishing together as a group. I wasn't sure how I felt about that. I just wanted to finish. I actually was ahead of the group for much of the time because I had this incredible uptick of energy. But because of what they were talking about, I slowed myself down. I actually remember that me and another racer sat waiting for the rest of the group so that we could finish together. I worried about what it would look like if I crossed first, and I didn't want to be the one seen as not a team player. The irony, these were people who raced competitively almost every weekend, and it just felt off. The second year was harder. I started the race after going through something personal and physically draining, and then I was injured early on with a sprained ankle. But somehow I pushed through and I finished every task, albeit not always without complaint or a little bit of whining here and there from me. It was not the most comfortable of races, I'll say. But again, I was voted by my peers to receive the overall award that they voted for because I showed up and I completed everything with all the difficult challenges that I had on top of the race. But what followed was quietly devastating. During the award ceremony, the race director, who was also my fiance at the time, gave this long speech for the male winner of this award, his friend. Yet when it came to me, nothing. It was like crickets. And all he had to say was it was just too hard for him to speak. So his co director stepped in very awkwardly to essentially say, "Good job, Amber." So this other person got a 15-20 minute speech, and I got a maybe 5 minute speech of way to go. And it was kind of embarrassing to say the least. It was a very shocking moment, and I felt very uncomfortable. What I don't think they know is that while they were tallying the marks of the votes, I overheard conversations about how it would look if I won twice in a row, especially because of who I was. Like that changed who I was or my efforts. Yet this was again voted on by the peers. But the race directors wanted to flip it to someone else's favor because, you know, heaven forbid someone win it twice, especially being me. That moment made me feel incredibly invisible, and it crushed me. And I started to question a lot more. The third year was my strongest. I had started off with a really good rhythm, and in the beginning, we were just tasked with survival skills. And then the next challenge was to run up this mountain and meet with one of the volunteers who would give us a poem that we would have to memorize as we headed back to base camp. And we had to have it memorized before we came back. So I got the poem. The poem was Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening by Robert Frost. And it was fairly short. I thought it was doable. So I got the poem and I started to memorize it line by line as I started to run down the mountain. The way that I memorized it was I would recite it in the rhythm with my steps. So I kept a pace, like a steady pace. I stayed focused and I just memorized it line by line. And I would memorize a line, recite it, memorize the second line, recite it from the start. And I would keep just doing that layer by layer. And what was even more cool for me was that I was actually the first one back. So not only did I have a nice rhythm coming down the mountain and memorizing it, I also was able to come in before everybody else, recite it, and then I got extra time to rest and relax before we started on the next task. So that was a really cool moment for me. Then on one of the next tasks, I hit a wall and was nearly disqualified because on the way back from a 13-mile run, I started to overheat and I was cutting it close because we have a time cutoff. So if we didn't make it back to camp by the time that it ended, I would be disqualified. Somehow, by the grace of God, I made it back just in time and I landed on the mat at zero point 0.0 seconds, keeping me in. That was pretty great. And it was pretty fun to watch everybody's reaction at that time because they all thought I was done. They thought I was going to be disqualified. So that was a pretty cool moment for me as well. I continued to stay strong throughout the entire event. And I even finished the last task, which was we had to walk to a waterfall through the stream, just more difficult terrain. get to the waterfall, and we had to fill a bucket with water, and we would have to have dye in it because so we couldn't cheat. And we would have to then turn around and take that water back up to camp. And I was actually doing pretty well because I kind of I got smart, and instead of a Home Depot 5-gallon bucket, I found something that was equivalent that I could store in my pack and carry it on my back rather than with my hands. So I stayed strong and I finished that last task, only coming in behind one other woman. And that felt pretty awesome too, that two women came in before everyone else. So that was pretty a cool moment. But still, the celebration felt muted for me as I watched everyone else get celebrated by the race directors. I just wasn't seen, and it wasn't because of my effort. I did really good, but I felt it was more because of the proximity and the perception. Others were always celebrated around me, but when it came to me, it felt like, nope, can't let anyone see her. At least that's what it felt like to me at the time. It was a very confusing time for me, and because it was in the years of tremendous shrinking, it was difficult to navigate and very telling of what direction I needed to go for myself. But I wouldn't recognize it until a little bit later. Later that same year, I ran another endurance race out in Vermont. It was brutal. Not only was getting there exhausting, the race itself is unforgiving. It involved extreme tasks that included a lot of heavy lifting, various tasks of breaking down, building up, and moving things around. It involved barefoot hiking, tethered to 10 other people and navigating a one-track path, sleep deprivation, heavy packs, mental challenges, a lot of mud and rain, with an insane amount of mental and physical exhaustion. At one point, I can even get my pack on without help because one of our tasks at the end was we had to find a rock that was, I want to say, like a third of our weight. And we had to guesstimate, and if we were wrong, we were penalized and got more weight. Anyways, I think my pack ended up weighing like 90 pounds and 80 to 90 pounds, something like that. Anyways, it was raining, it was muddy. We had to go through this mud pit and with the packs on. And then once we got through the mud pit, we would then have to take a lap through them up the mountain and back down. And it wasn't the most forgiving terrain because it was raining. It was slick and muddy. So we had to be a little more careful than usual. And we had to do that, I believe, 5 times. First time I got through, second time I got through. By the third time, I think I was stuck in the mud what felt like 2 hours, I swear. And I ended up taking my pack off while I was in the mud because I was just trying to find a way to get through. And I finally got through. I finally got out, and my pack was just, I couldn't get my pack on. So a fellow racer who later became my friend helped me get my pack back on and gave me a tip on how to get it back on without, if I had to take it off again and nobody was there to help me. So that was incredible. I really needed that in that moment because I was done. I think I got like 2 hours of sleep in like 70 hours. So I was just tired. On that third lap, though, after I got my pack back on, I remember going up slowly and I started hallucinating. I started seeing there was two people ahead of me, I believe, and they had glow sticks on the back of their packs. And I just remember seeing the shining twins. So that was a little funny for me to see. And I was just like, okay, refocus, take a breath, and keep moving. And that's what I did. I ended up falling on my way up as well, struggling to get back up. Luckily, another racer again was there to help me back up and anchor me on another rock so that I could push myself up. So that last lap was really, really taxing. As I came back down off the mountain on that last lap, I was happy to hear that we could finally have crew. And so when I headed back, I saw that there was a tent and people, and I got there and there was food and hot beverages and the crews. As I was standing there, my fiance at the time was asking me what I needed, if I was going to keep going, and I didn't know what to say. I was tired, I was delusional, and I didn't really know what I needed at that moment. I just felt completely drained. And so he just left me standing there. All of a sudden I was like, where'd he go? Where'd he go? And the other people were like, oh, he left to go back to bed because he didn't think he needed to be here. I just stood there stunned. I think I probably would have been less so, but this is the same person who essentially forced a ridiculous ceremony on me in the beginning of the race that I personally didn't want to be a part of because I didn't want to be a part of the show. I don't know what other way to put it. It just felt like a show. And because he wasn't racing that year, I just felt like, of course, he had to put himself in the center. And I just didn't want to be there. And then at the end, when I needed him, he left. It was quite the dichotomy, to be honest. And in that moment, something just cracked wide open in me. I knew deep in my bones, this is not how I wanted to live. And I knew I deserved more. So needless to say, endurance racing shrank me in so many ways, but it also helped me see just how capable I was when I actually focused on myself instead of the perception of others. In addition to endurance racing, another place that I felt small was with work. Work became another place where I learned how to shrink. At first, I was involved, present, and engaged with the office, with the activities, all of the above. I enjoyed being a part of it as it was my first time in an office environment, and I really wanted to show up and be present and be a part of a team. But then one year, the whole environment of the office shifted, and I just felt an extreme lack of respect and gratitude that really bothered me, and it drove me to shrink again. Along with that, the noise just continually seemed to increase, and I just could not handle it anymore. I withdrew further, and I stayed very, very small. I just came to work, did my work, and avoided any kind of visibility. I just was in that mode of go to work, do your work, go home, and interact with as few people as possible. Eventually, the pressure of being small or feeling small became too much. And I ended up deciding that I needed to part ways. So I wrote a 7-page resignation letter, front and back. Just kidding. But seriously, I wrote this 7-page resignation letter pouring out everything I had been holding in over the last several years. And I sat down with the owners and the bosses and I read it to them, and I cried the entire time because I was just so nervous and so scared of thinking that I could actually speak up. But when I finished, it was a relief. I exhaled this big breath that I felt like I was holding for years. That letter was the first time that I truly used my voice at work. And while my exit is still pending, over time, I transitioned roles, learned new skills, and found space to heal with a position that allowed me to take a break from the constant stress and responsibilities to show up for everyone and have no reciprocation. I was eventually allowed to work from home for a little while, and it gave my nervous system the rest that it needed and time to settle and balance out a little bit. Now, being returned back into the office, it came a little bit easier for me. And I walked into the office with a little bit more confidence, clearer boundaries, and a lot more peace. I'm still working on it, but even this week, I had quite the breakthrough moment for myself. And I walked away with just a lot of pride that I actually spoke up and didn't allow the emotions or the other people in the room take over. For as long as I can remember, I have been seeking validation from others, thinking it would give me permission to stand taller. But it was never enough until I realized the validation had to come from me. And when I realized that the validation had to come from me, it was a game changer because I know me better than anybody knows me. And I know that I did a good job at work. I also know that my endurance racing years were pivotal for me. I look back at it now and with a lot more joy because I see what I did now in a different light. And now it doesn't bother me what other people didn't see because I see it for myself. And I, while I was sad for a very long time that I didn't recognize that sooner, I'm glad I did because those moments were big for me. They shifted my life and they gave me a vision that I wouldn't have otherwise. So, yeah, the realization that the validation had to come from me was pretty special. The last place I shrank was within myself. After years of loss, survival, and responsibility, I turned inward. I became a lot quieter and more invisible to others. I also became more reflective and more aware. Hiking and walking alone actually became my refuge. I found spaces that felt right for me, which allowed me to take more moments to breathe and listen and understand to what actually served me and what I needed in the moment. And then I also was able to recognize what I didn't. I really don't see that part of my journey as shrinking, really. I see it more of a rebuilding phase of my life and a remembering phase of my life. Rebuilding some of the core things, my foundation per se, because I felt like it just fell out from under me for a very long time. And then a lot about remembering who I am and where I came from. And it was one of the best things that I could have done for myself. I'm still working on it, and I will be for life, essentially. But I am realizing now that there are things and situations that have halted my progress. And not so much because I was shrinking, but because I was waiting for those situations to resolve themselves or waiting for others to meet me where I was. I'm just glad that I'm at this point where I don't shrink anymore. I stand up and say what I need to say most of the time. There are times where it's just not necessary, but that's what journaling's for. But I'm really proud of myself for choosing myself and remembering that I have a voice and that I can stand up for myself and not shrink anymore. Choosing myself has been an ongoing practice. Some days I'm flowing down the river with a lot of ease, and then some days I'm swimming upstream, resisting all of it, every single bit of it. But each choice has brought me closer to who I am and who I want to be. I certainly am going to continue to choose myself. At least now I can recognize a pattern, and I can now move through with more clarity on how to choose myself. I'm no longer willing to make myself smaller to keep the peace or make other people more comfortable than myself. As I sit with this reflection on choosing myself, I'm reminded that the growth rarely happens in isolation. It's shaped by the moments that stretch us, the relationships that challenge us, and the friction that asks us to look more closely at who we are becoming. And that brings me to this week's Brooklyn Lights the Way. For Brooklyn Lights the Way this week, I want to honor the people who created enough resistance in my life to push me toward my own becoming. This one can be hard to hold because these aren't always the people who felt kind or safe or loving in the ways we hope for. They're often the ones who challenged us, who hurt us, who misunderstood us, or who mirrored back the places where we were still shrinking. Along my healing journey, I've come to see that while I may no longer want certain people in my life, they offered some of the most important parting gifts. They showed me where my boundaries were still unclear. They revealed the places I wasn't honoring myself. They reflected back the work I still needed to do in order to walk the path I am on today. And while their presence wasn't always gentle, the clarity they brought was undeniable. I truly believe that every person who enters our life carries the potential to be a light. It may not always be bright. The light may not always feel warm and gentle. It may come through resistance or discomfort, but it often illuminates exactly what we need to see. It took me a long time to reach a place where I could appreciate those lessons, to understand that even resistance can be a guide, that friction can be formative, and the growth often comes disguised as discomfort. So today, Brooklyn Lights the Way honors the mirrors, the catalysts, and the moments that quietly and sometimes painfully help light the path forward. As we come to the end of this reflection, I just want to pause and honor what we walked through together today. Because choosing yourself isn't one decision, it's a series of small returns. It's noticing the places you learn to shrink and naming them with compassion. The childhood lessons that taught you to be quiet, the moments where judgment made you second guess your voice, the seasons where survival required you to stay small just to get through. And for me, it wasn't one chapter. It showed up in different forms, in different places. It showed up in school when I learned what it felt like to be misunderstood. It showed up in relationships when shrinking felt like the cost of keeping the peace. It showed up in those endurance years where I proved to myself again and again that I was capable, yet still felt myself holding back, worried about how my strength would be received. And it showed up at work, where I stayed quiet for too long, until one day I finally used my voice, trembling, crying, and honest, as I exhaled a breath I didn't even realize I had been holding. But threaded through every one of those moments was the same truth. I kept shrinking because it felt safer, because it felt familiar, because I believed that being agreeable would keep me protected. And then something shifted. Not all at once, not perfectly, but steadily. I started listening to my body. I started trusting the unease that would rise when something wasn't aligned. I started noticing where my laughter faded and what that was trying to tell me. And slowly, I began choosing myself again. That choice looked like speaking up, walking away from what diminished me. It looked like taking up space without apology and letting my voice shake and using it anyway. It also looked like allowing my life to be mine. And if there's one thing I want you to carry with you from this episode, it's this. You are not wrong for wanting more space. You are not too much for wanting to be seen. You are not selfish for choosing yourself. You are simply coming home. And as you move into your week, I want to offer you a gentle question to sit with. Where have I been shrinking? And what might it look like to choose myself one small step at a time? Not a dramatic overhaul, not a perfect plan, just one honest choice, one boundary, one truth spoken, one moment where you don't abandon yourself. Because the path doesn't change all at once, it changes with each return. And if you're still in the middle of it, still finding your footing, still learning how to stand tall again, I want you to know this too. You're not behind. You're not broken. You're becoming. Thank you for walking with me today and holding space for my stories. And thank you for listening inward and for choosing yourself gently in whatever way you can. Until next time, walk slowly, breathe deeply, and remember you can always find your way to vibe.